Greetings, Elder Gerard Williams here. For my podcast video today, I want to have a conversation about the authentic self. And the reason behind this particular video discussion is because I've had some interesting conversations with a few individuals here in Western New York outside of the church here. Individuals who are involved in the social justice work that we're doing here, individuals who are unique and talented and gifted and have a calling of their own. But the commonality for these conversations that I had with both male and female individuals is that they felt a certain sense of calling, spiritually wise, calling to do a particular work. Yet the individual churches that they belong to did not seem to allow the space for the type of work they felt called to do. It's been a conversation I've had with a few times with a few individuals. Oddly enough, most of them were millennials, and maybe it's an age thing. Maybe it's the age thing of elders or seniors not willing to allow space for the next generation to step up and do that which God has called them to do. And so my conversation with these individuals had more to do with their authentic self, because I think it's problematic, particularly within African American churches, and not necessarily a new dynamic or a new thing, but it's problematic when individuals bring their spirituality and their talent and their gifts to the surface, and then want to avail those very same gifts in the service of their God to the betterment of their individual local churches, and yet feel somehow that the church does not afford them the opportunity or the space or the structure is not one that is comfortable for their particular calling. And so my conversations with them had to do around, well, the priority ought to be finding a way to operate in your authentic self in a way that allows that calling to come forward. I found it interesting, at least in the last two cases. One was a young man and one was a young woman. They both found themselves operating in the periphery, just kind of in the background, not really active in their respective churches, even though these are clearly talented individuals out in the community doing fabulous social justice work. They're great personalities, and they do have a rapport with their peers. However, when it comes to their spiritual development and their spiritual practice and applying those gifts in their local churches, somehow there's an uncomfortability that calls them to withdraw, just kind of pull back or kind of operate in the periphery. And I think it's a shame that churches today have not evolved to the place that allows each new generation to come forward in the way that God has called them to come forward. I feel like the church is missing an opportunity to grow and evolve. But I wanted to share with those individuals who may be viewing this video that when you are feeling that particular pull of the Spirit, I don't want you to feel like there is no answer, or there's no way for you to move forward, or you just feel like you're stuck somewhere in a purgatory type environment. I think there is an answer on a spiritual level, and it might not necessarily be one that your local church may be comfortable with, and you have to make the individual call on whether or not you're going to step into that and then allow the chips to fall where they may, or whether or not you have it within yourself to have the difficult conversations with your leadership that you need to have. But the priority is to not allow the Spirit of God that is in you to be stifled because of the structure that you may find yourself in doesn't seem to make room for you. That, I believe, would be a detriment to your development. It would be to to the detriment of who God is calling for in this moment, which I think ought to always be the priority. And so it's always about the authentic self. It's always about the authentic self and finding a way for God to do in you what God has placed in you to do, and let the chips fall where they may, recognizing what is yours to carry and also recognizing what is God's to work out. I think if it's in you and you feel that strong calling, clearly in my mind, the Spirit is calling for it for a reason. It might be this particular generation needs that expression of God in you that is striving to come forward. It might be that would facilitate the very change, at least in this particular generation, that so many individuals are frustrated with trying to bring forth and hoping to see in this new generation. It might be that you might be the conduit to help create the shift in the church, which is so greatly needed. I don't like to see, particularly young folks, who are kind of held in a purgatory type space around their spiritual development and their growth, especially when individuals, at least in my perception and in my awareness, present as so talented and so powerful and so charismatic and so connected to spirit. And their frustration, I see their frustration, I get their frustration, and it just softens my heart around the hope for the black church. But the bottom line for me is that in this moment, God is calling for a very particular thing in you, and that ought to always be the priority. Other individuals may or may not get it. The leadership that you may find yourself having to serve under may not get it. That is not that should not be a priority for you. What you ought to do, and what I would recommend doing, is trust the God in you, the God that has called you to this moment, the God has blessed you with those talents and those gifts, and more importantly, the God that has revealed to you the vision, the passion for your life. In my mind, clearly that is needed. That is what is needed for this moment. And we do our communities a disservice when we don't allow ourselves to step into that. We do our communities a disservice when we don't hear the Spirit and yield to the Spirit, and whatever that may look like, even if it means coming out of our comfort space, coming out of our comfort zones, even if it means upsetting the waters of our particular sphere a little bit. God is able to work all of that out. It is not really a new particular dynamic. Generations have dealt with that time and time again. What is more important, even in this moment, is that God has called you for this particular time in all of your gifts and all of your talents. And I would hate to see you have that stifled or held in reserve or put on the back burner because the individuals, the elders or the seniors or the leadership that is in your sphere can't seem to make room for you. Trust the God in you. He knows exactly what he's doing. She knows exactly who you are. And you need to hear that you were called for a time such as this, just as you are, with all of your gifts and with all of your talents. And then trust that God will provide you everything you need to do in order for that vision to come forward. God bless you. Amen.